Recording in progress.
You can try. Only 4?
Only because we have that.
We need.
Councilmember Wall is watching from.
Yeah.
afar.
Geez, I should have done that.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our City Council study session for May 13th, 2024. Glad to have you with us today. I know the mayor's running a little late and we should expect 1 or 2 more, but we will go ahead and get started as we have a very full agenda today. So I will turn it over to our City Administrator, Allison Zelms.
Thank you, Council President, council members, members of the public. Our first item is an update on air service development at Rochester International Airport. So just want to set the stage a little bit. We do have Jack Penning here and John Reed, as well as some other folks who have been working with us to talk about the importance of air service. And as you can see, it does align with affordable living. So leisure service is, low-cost leisure service is, and being able to access that right here in the backyard of Rochester is something that reduces the cost for people to be able to travel, whether that's as an individual or a family. Having the airports present here, both as a commercial service provider, but also for cargo and private service is important for the economic vibrancy of our region. The second largest industry here is manufacturing in our region. So they do rely pretty heavily on cargo. It's not just our friends in the healthcare industry. And then having quality services. So having a good experience at Rochester Airport is also about being able to have easy to access flights to more than just 1 or 2 locations. So really just excited to be here to talk about that. And on the next slide, I think it's important to be grounded in some of these policy considerations. We do operate an airport in partnership with Mayo Clinic Airport Corporation. Is that something that we see as valuable long-term? You get to continue operating that airport for 20 years every day that we take dollars from the FAA, which, by the way, is about every day. Is a minimum revenue guarantee in addition to what we already have out there for the Dallas market, something that would be of interest and be positive for the financials of the airport and the future of the community and the strategic priorities that you've set out. And then be thinking about how that can help the long-term financial health of the airport, having that ease of travel access, but also making sure that we have the underpinnings of the airport's financials, which is commercial service, growing and being a viable opportunity for the community. So with that, I will turn it over to Jack Penning. He is our consultant from Valair. We work with him very closely on the Airport Corporation board, as well as on the Airport Commission. And John Reed and Mary Gassner are also here to be supportive and answer any questions he can't, but I bet he can answer most of them.
We'll see. Thank you so much. And thank you all. It's great to be here. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to talk about this because a lot has changed in air service, in our air service at this community, and in the airline industry that's going to impact us not for the next 5 years or 15, but the next 30, 40 years. And we need to put ourselves in position for a successful airport now is a critical time because of challenges that the airlines are dealing with. So who am I? I'm Jack Penning. I'm founder and managing partner of Valair Aviation Consulting. We are a group of 9 people. We work in airports, over 100 airports all over the world, in developing air service and guiding airports as they communicate and work with airlines to grow. We've been the consultant here for over a decade, working with you, the city of Rochester, and with Mayo Clinic. So I'm very, very familiar with how the air service has changed over the last 10 years. I've been involved in every project that we've had in that time. So I want to walk through the air service market today, essentially what passengers we are keeping and what we're losing to MSP. That's a critical consideration. How many people are driving every single day and what that says about the potential of this market over the long term. There are a lot of headwinds in the airline industry that are fighting against smaller community air service and the viability of the service at RST. Pilot shortage, increased costs, service losses, business demand that's changed since the pandemic. I want to walk you through those so you can see how we are kind of lumped in with other airports of our size, even though we have a unique market and kind of what we're fighting against. That leads us into our strategy, which are the targets for air service, the most likely air service that we can secure in the shorter term, 18, 24-month term, and what it's going to take to do that. based on what other airports are doing. So let's begin with our market. I want to point out we're back up to 7 departures a day now. We have 4 departures a day now to Chicago. We have 3 now to Minneapolis. We were down to 2 flights to each market for a long time after the pandemic. So we have been able to re-recruit services performing well. We are operating on Chicago with about 80 to 85% of the seats filled, depending on the month. Minneapolis, slightly lower than that, but in the same range. The service is profitable. It's performing well. So we have a base of service that can bring in patients, that can connect our community out to the world. That's priority number 1. But we're still way down in the number of passengers that we're using this airport before the pandemic to today. Before the pandemic, in 2019, we had almost 500 people a day departing from this airport. Today, we've got about 230 departing from this airport. So we're less than half of where we were before. We had United in the market, you'll recall. United pulled out of 38 cities in one day, and we were one of those cities. We also have had Sun Country operating less than daily. Sun Country is now using 12 of its aircraft to fly packages for Amazon. One of those aircraft was the one that was operating at RST. So we've seen service decline. We've seen passengers decline. We are filling, as I said, 77% of our seats. So we have very strong demand and solid, many would say high fares. Those fares are good for the airlines, not always good for those who need to buy a ticket. But our service is profitable. We're still filling fewer seats than average, but we do so at a higher fare, not because we're priced high, but because a lot of our travelers have to buy at the last minute. They're patients, they're getting an appointment, they're buying at the last minute. Those travelers are spending more for the convenience of flying here when they have to. So we're actually much more profitable than a lot of the markets that are above us. I want to show, though, if you look at the blue and those numbers at the bottom of the chart, that's the percentage of passengers who are traveling to and from Olmsted County that use RST. So we had seen continuing increases over many years, 2013, 2017, 2019. We were retaining 30% of the market at one point. Almost a third of the people that flew to and from Olmsted County were using RST. Now, after the pandemic, we're down to 14% again. We're essentially where we started 11 years ago. That's what we have to build back if we're going to have a viable airport. 86% of our travelers drive to another airport, the vast majority MSP. 84% of our passengers do drive to MSP. It's an average of 1,400 people a day in each direction that fly to and from Olmsted County but fly out of MSP. 1,400 a day in each direction are getting on the road to drive up to MSP for flights. And it's more a function when we're filling 77% of our seats, that's more of a function of us not having sufficient capacity than it is a problem with our air service. If we were only filling 50% of our seats, then our air service would be the problem. That's not the case. We just don't have enough seats. We have to recruit more seats for this airport to be truly viable. I want to point out, with the number of passengers that we have every single day, we could support 24 departures a day at 80% full. 24 departures a day. Now, we'll never retain every single passenger. We won't be at 24, but that's just for illustrative purposes. Now, if we go back to our retention before the pandemic, we were retaining 30%. If we retain 33%, this is what the route map can look like. We have service to Dallas and Atlanta back. We have Orlando, we have Las Vegas, plus our current service. With 9 departures a day, that would serve about a third of our traveling public. If we retained 50% of our current passengers without any growth whatsoever, we could add service to Phoenix, we could add service to New York City, and still fill every flight. That would be 13 departures a day. The maximum retention any regional airport will reach is around 75%. We're at about 70% in one of my markets, Idaho Falls. We've grown from 4 departures a day, and now we have 23 departures a day, and all are doing well. We've done that since 2004 to today, so over 20 years. They're at 70% retention of their passengers. That's about as high as they will be able to go. because there's always a certain number of passengers who just won't use whatever airport it is. Minneapolis loses passengers too. They lose passengers out to low-cost service at places like Fargo and Duluth, believe it or not, they do. But if we retain 75%, that's what our route map looks like. We have coast-to-coast service. It's very similar if you look at another, quote, company town. Walmart is based in Bentonville, Arkansas. The Northwest Arkansas Airport is the smallest airport in the country that has service to both Los Angeles and to New York LaGuardia every single day. And it does so because everyone flies locally and people quit driving to Little Rock. That's what our service can potentially look like. So we are on the beginning of a process to try and get there. Will we get to this number before I retire? Probably not. Before John retires? No, no way. Not a chance. Before Mary retires, definitely a chance. But this is really the ultimate goal, is to look like that. Now, what we're fighting against are the headwinds. I want to point out we just don't have very many traditional carriers to work with anymore. So if you go back and you look at, look at these logos, many of these carriers serve this airport over time. Airlines like Republic and Northwest. Go back before that, North Central. But if you look, Ozark, that's another of my favorite. You look at what we have today, we have 2 of the big 4. And most successful regional airports of our size have 2 of the big 4 airlines. That's just the airlines divvy up the passengers and pick their markets. And American and Delta have picked us. We're probably going to be too small for Southwest for many decades to come for their business model to work. United, of course, has decided the regional markets like ours just aren't as important to its business model right now. So we have American and Delta, but who do we even go talk to about expanding service? Well, we have our Dallas effort that's underway. That's with American. We're trying to work with Delta to restore service to Atlanta. But beyond that, those are opportunities with the big carriers. We've got to think about other carriers that fill other niches in the industry. The main issue that airlines are dealing with today is a lack of pilots. So in the pandemic, a large number, 7,000 pilots took early retirement. There weren't nearly enough pilots to take those jobs that were fully trained and qualified. And it's going to take many years, even with the airlines starting their own academies, for us to get to the point where we've got enough pilots to fly networks the way they used to look. So we're about 14,000 pilots short of what we need to fly the 2019 network right now. And it's going to get worse. We're going to be 24,000 pilots short in just the next couple of years. So the airlines have had to cut service, like United cutting 38 cities in one day. They simply didn't have pilots to fly those planes. And they're going to have pilots fly larger planes to get as many passengers on every plane as possible. Almost all of our flights today are on 70 or 76 seat aircraft, where in 2019, almost all were on 50-seat aircraft. So we have 26 seats more on average per flight. It's efficient to use pilots that way. Right now, around 500 regional jets are parked. Another 200 are headed to the desert. There's simply not pilots to fly the flights. What's also happening is the remaining jets are just flying a lot less during the day. You may notice airplanes sit on the ground here longer than they used to. So the letters on this chart are not important. This is an illustration of how you would schedule one aircraft before the pandemic. You would try to fly each plane about 12 hours a day. Keep that plane in there 12 hours a day. Today, there are only enough pilots to fly the same plane about 6.5 hours a day. So you will notice if you go to Minneapolis, those planes are sitting on the gate for a long time. There are large gaps where the plane could probably fly somewhere. There just aren't enough pilots to schedule it. What that means is you have a lease cost on an airplane. Average plane like this is $5,000 a day is what it costs to lease it. So where that used to be $8 a seat, now you need $17 a seat just to cover the lease of the plane. Before you pay anybody, you need $17. The other piece is pilot wages have gone way up because pilots are in demand. They have a lot of bargaining power, and good for them. They've been able to get their wages up. The average regional starting pilot for An airline like SkyWest, who we have flying here today, is now $108,000 a year. So you come in the door, that's your starting wage. It used to be $62,000 a year. So with that double, that adds another $5 in cost to every single seat. So you can see where I'm going with this. We're adding lease costs, we're adding pilot costs, airport costs have gone up. And so while in 2019, our flight to Chicago cost $84 a seat to operate, today it's $120 a seat. $240 round trip just to operate the plane. That doesn't take into account, that does take into account fuel, but it doesn't take into account actually making money. And it doesn't take into account how many do we fill of those seats. On Chicago, say 80%, that means the airline needs a fare around $300 round trip just to make that flight work to Chicago. So air service is going to get much more expensive. And that's where low-cost carriers realize an opportunity, and that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. Not to belabor the subject, but look at all those United Globe logos. Those are all the airports that were with us in 2021 when United said we were done flying to Rochester, but there were many all over the country. Delta left a number of airports, and so did American. 131 airports have lost an airline. So now, guess what? We're all fighting each other for the capacity. And that's really made things challenging because oftentimes great business cases for service don't win. I'll explain more what I mean by that in a moment. The other thing we've noticed, especially in this market, is a real change in how business travelers fly. There's a lot more days at home. 28% of total work days are remote now. It used to be around 5% before the pandemic. And Saturday, Sunday travel has gone way up. Those used to be pretty quiet days, especially at RST, while the middle of the week, which used to be our really busy days, are way down. There's a lot more leisure travel, and there's a lot more. We actually have been around the airport, and I went to each of the Mayo campuses over the last 5 weeks, and we did focus groups with Mayo Clinic employees because we wanted to understand what's behind these numbers. There's a lot more people who are taking their family when they go on trips, especially out of this campus. I have to go to Phoenix and work on Tuesday, Wednesday. We're going to leave Saturday, come back the following Sunday. I'll work remote from there, and you guys come with me. So we've seen a complete shift in how travel is done. Because of that shift, the traditional network model maybe doesn't work as well in this market as it used to. And so airlines have started redeploying assets to the places in the shading, leisure markets. So rather than fly an aircraft on Atlanta to Rochester, Delta would probably rather add another flight from Atlanta to Fort Lauderdale. That's where the demand is. And that's why the markets in the shading are where the low-cost carriers have really focused growth. And we're going to continue to see that. So that kind of shapes where we're going with our strategy. These are bases for low-cost carriers. You've probably heard of some of them. You may not have heard of all of them. But you can see where they are based, where they have crew bases. They're all around the collar where people go on vacation. And it's not because they're just carrying vacation travelers, they're carrying all kinds of travelers. The issue is that's where demand has shifted. That's where people want to go. That's where people are traveling today. When we develop our strategy, we aren't going to convince an airline like Breeze, who you can see with their checkmark logo, has bases on the coast. They're not going to fly to Denver from here. They have no presence in that market. They want to go to Florida. They want to go to Arizona. They want to go to Las Vegas and take our people to those spots. Breeze, by the way, is founded by David Neilman, the guy who founded JetBlue. So it's another really high quality airline. All of these carriers have made huge strides, and many are very good airlines now. But that's why when we think about what we're targeting aside from that Dallas effort, we are thinking about these markets. That's where the aircraft are, that's where the aircraft are available, and that's where the pilots are available. That's where airlines are expanding. We need to be in the game by inserting ourselves into the existing business plan rather than trying to make an airline adopt a completely new business plan that's built around what we want. We did an economic impact analysis, and should we get service to these communities, all of them, it would generate on an annual basis about $7.3 million in inbound visitor spending to this community. That's direct spending. That doesn't include any induced spending or anything. That's what the people flying the other direction on this service, which is only a very small portion of the passengers on this type of service, but it would still generate that. Just Orlando alone generates $2.2 million in new spending in this community with the people who are coming the other direction. We're able to do those forecasts because Sun Country gave us great data. They flew to Fort Myers, they flew from here to Phoenix. We know exactly how many people on those planes were coming here. We just used those numbers and replaced the destination. In the case of Phoenix, we use the exact number. Phoenix, $3.6 million in annual impact. That's just visitor spending. That's not what people here save on airfare and then spend in the community. That's not the spending from those who work in hotels or restaurants or rental cars or anything else. And that does not include the revenue to the airport. So that's another big piece. The more people that come and rent rental cars, the more people who park in the parking lot, the better the airport budget looks for future development. And that's obviously very important to the city because you guys are on the hook for that budget. So the main reason I'm here, to be quite frank, is because the competitive landscape requires that we take action beyond what we normally would, which would be make a business case, present it to the carrier, convince them that they can make money, market the service, and go from there once the service starts. Every route that you see on this map was supported by a minimum revenue guarantee, which is a fund that sits on account, and if the airline loses money, the fund is invoiced for the difference on a pre-negotiated target. And if the airline makes money, the fund is not touched. So every route that you see there, just since the beginning of the year, has a revenue guarantee. What happened during the pandemic, you guys know many communities received ARPA funding. Many communities had a lot of uses for it. Some communities didn't know what to do with it. And so in a community like Plattsburgh, New York, there was about a $2 million leftover fund. They decided that goes towards air service. It's a perpetual fund for revenue guaranteeing air service. And they got service to both Tampa and Orlando as the first part of that fund. Both markets doing very well, by the way. Not every route works. There are a lot that are speculative, but we know in the ones that I generally work on, I don't ask for money if I think I'm just going to burn all the money. I may burn some of it, but it's not in our business. In 150 of these in the last 10 years that we like to burn communities. So this has become the new and most important factor that airlines measure when they're choosing where to fly. We could have and we do have a very compelling business case, especially if you look at Orlando and Phoenix. Those are very compelling because there's a multitude of traffic sources for both of those. There's community traffic that's the vast majority of it. You might be surprised about that, but there is Mayo Clinic traffic and patient traffic. Mayo Clinic traffic, by the way, at RST, employees are less than 10% of our passengers, less than 10%. And patients are about another 10% right now. So the vast majority of the people who are getting on planes at RST are not associated with Mayo Clinic. It's the community. So we are fighting against other business cases that look equally as compelling but have more risk mitigation. They've got these funds put together. That is why when Breeze Airways is evaluating Plattsburgh, New York against Rochester, Minnesota, both look like they're going to be good long-term investments. They'll be able to fly them for many, many years. They won't need long-term subsidy. That's why Plattsburgh is chosen, because in the first 2 years, there's not near as much risk. If a network planner who's deciding where the planes go chooses Rochester over a market that forecasts equally as well, and then Rochester loses money, they're going to be looking for a new airline to work at. So there's so much money in the system, and there will be for the next few years. If we don't have this kind of fund, we're essentially not in the ballgame for additional service. That's really where we are. And, you know, that's a hard chart to read, so I'm going to skip that. But I want to point out Not only those new routes that were supported by revenue guarantees are places where the incentive was critical. Every single dot you see on that map has at least $200,000 in funds for air service incentives. Every single dot. There's more than 360 dots on that map. $200,000 at least. The airport here has a marketing fund for new service. $200,000 over 2 years spent to market that service. Airports themselves are not allowed to use revenue to incentivize air service aside from marketing and fee waivers. Legally, that's all that the airport can do itself. Other entities have to do other incentives. So the airport does everything to the maximum accepted by federal law. So the airport is on this map because we do have a $200,000 incentive. But many of those dots have many millions of dollars. That's where we are stuck right now. And so with that, obviously, we're very, very happy to take questions. And more than anything, thank you so much for the time. We know your time is very valuable and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. And it's great to have a presentation on the airport in general, because there's a lot of exciting things going on. And I know that our investment is important. Thanks for coming up, John. So I guess as I've reflected on this and I'm part of the airport commission, one of my thoughts is the minimum revenue guarantee. It sounds sort of like, oh, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Like, who sets the minimum, I guess? And is it something that we would need to be flexible on the exact number so we are competitive? Or is the number that you've recommended the most competitive we need to be? I guess my question is it enough?
Right. I think it's a great question. So essentially, we are trying to develop a number based on our experience in similar markets that we think will get us the service. The problem with that is that the numbers are always varying.
Yeah.
And when we did Atlanta, we had a revenue grant, we had a federal grant for the Atlanta service, and it was less than $1 million, and that was plenty. It only used 16% of the fund. Now there are some airports coming with $3 and $4 million.
Right.
And so I don't think we're really looking for 3 million, but I will say that the higher the number, the easier it is for me to get the attention of those who are going to make a difference.
So the higher the number, as in I think it was 1.1 or so that you recommended, is that a number you feel good and confident?
And maybe
one
you
of-
could just quickly
Oh, yeah,
clarify, they
please.
didn't recommend that number. That's the number that wouldn't touch any of your currently utilized fund balances or revenue. That is a number that is basically created by utilizing the remainder of unallocated holistic budget
Sure.
stability funds. So it's somewhat of an arbitrary number. I
Okay.
think it gets close, but
This is
I
what I'm
will
trying
let
to get
Jack
at. Like,
answer.
what is the number that you
So-
feel confident in?
I said, I think to Allison, we have to be 7 figures to be in the game. 1.5 is better than 1. I would love to have altogether from all contributors 1.5 million available. Part of that is I would really like to begin service with more than just one route with a couple flights a week. I would like to begin with 2 or 3 routes at once to really get critical mass.
Okay, and above and beyond that remaining balance, what would a funding source be for if we bumped it up a little bit?
So if the city council was interested in moving forward with something, and let's say it was 1.5 million, and I think we would still want to work with partners to see if we could get additional funds, because the goal would not be to stop. It would be the 20-year march of trying to continue to advance, and hopefully in markets where we aren't utilizing the full minimum revenue guarantee, right? So if, let's say it was $1.5 million, you do still have over the 43% recommended fund balance in the general fund. So it'd really be sort of an accounting adjustment, if you will. So assuming that we would be starting with profitable markets. And so you would need about $330,000, and that would be an allocated fund balance from the general fund. So it wouldn't be new revenue, it wouldn't be levy, it would be, if that was something that would be my recommendation if you wanted to do a larger amount, would be that it would be it would be an allocation of general fund balance. in addition to,
The leftover ARPA funds. Or,
right, it's a combination of funds that where were able to beat budget, do other things like that. But it's from the Holistic Budget Stability Fund. What's listed about 3 slides from now.
all right, I think I have some other questions, but others do as well. So Councilmember Bransford.
Hi, thanks. Great, excuse me, thanks for the presentation. So just a couple things come to mind as a passenger. And my own experiences with Rochester Municipal Airport, I actually really like going there. It's easy. But there's two things that you're gonna, independent of whatever fund you have, you want to have a warm fuzzy that people are gonna go, okay, I'm gonna fly out of Rochester, and I know my plane's not gonna be late. I know it's not gonna be canceled. I know I'm not gonna have to jump on a shuttle at the last minute to go catch my flight in Minneapolis. So there's gonna have to be a little bit of trust building there, because right now, people are like, yeah, well, the last one was canceled, the last one was late, I'm missing my connecting flights. So there's a bit of a perception. It doesn't matter how much money you have in a fund to make sure that the airlines get their cut. You have to make sure that the customer service is absolutely top notch, and you have on-time flights that are 95%, 90%, whatever the industry standard, better than the industry standard, because the industry standard on time stinks right now, right? The other thing too is you need to make it financially competitive, because I can get a $150 cheaper flight flying out of Minneapolis. My family will drive me up and I save $150. It's not a lot in gas, right? Some cases, even though the shuttle buses have gone up in cost, it's still cheaper to go up, right? So I tried to fly out to a conference. I had to shuttle both ways because of canceled or late flights. So two things: customer service, and you got to make sure that the flights are competitive financially so that it makes sense to fly out of Rochester.
And I think you key in on why our strategy is the way it is, because what we're talking about here with these carriers like a Breeze, like an Avello, is their whole value proposition is not to compete with MSP, it's to compete with your couch. They want a fare so low that you're trying to make the decision, am I going to Phoenix this weekend, or am I staying here and watching the Cardinals and the Vikings on TV? That's what they're trying to do. Their average fare across their network is under $100 each way. They're able to do it because they have lower cost crews, they have brand new airplanes that cost less and that don't burn near as much fuel, and they tend to have communities like ours where they have a low cost airport to operate from, not an MSP. So the fare, number one, will be orders of magnitude lower than here, and on par or slightly lower than Sun Country at Minneapolis. That's the fare basis. And in terms of reliability, the nice thing with the MRG is they can't invoice against it unless they operate. So if they cancel a flight, that doesn't go against the MRG. If they have the MRG, it incentivizes them to operate.
Can I ask a follow-up? So that leads right into the next set of questions I had about pilots. So that's great. They have to operate to get their money, but if there's a huge pilot shortage and they're going to concentrate their resources at hubs, and so, well, this regional airport, we're going to forget that flight because we need a pilot here, right? So you're fighting that too. I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm just thinking through some of the complexities here. So great. Yep. Fare's good, but the on time and reliability is going to be huge. And you're still facing that pilot shortage is kind of a hurdle, I would imagine. Right. So this is going to turn into a question. So based on that, do you have any data on other markets that do this in terms of their ROI? So is it working for them, in other words?
Yes, most of it's confidential, as you can imagine, because if I were speaking in Champaign, Illinois, you probably wouldn't want me giving your P&L to them. And the airline would probably not like that too much either. But like I said, Plattsburgh, New York, working great. Salem, Oregon, we have a deal with Avello. It started last fall. I can tell you in that case, we have not invoiced against the revenue guarantee, and they had one cancellation because the fog was too too thick in Salem to land. They've had one cancellation since November, operating 6 flights a week. In terms of the pilot shortage is really focused in the regionals because those pilots want to get to airlines like Breeze and Avelo and Allegiant. The low-cost carriers are particularly attractive to pilots right now because they all, part of the compensation is in stock. And those low-cost carriers are highly likely to go public. They're private now. And like Allegiant did, the pilots who went to Allegiant when it began in 2005 are all sitting on a beach with many, many millions of dollars because of the stock options. So those carriers haven't faced near the pilot crunch that the regionals have. The regionals are still getting rated.
Could you maybe also just touch on, again, some of these routes we actually have Rochester data on?
Yeah, that's true. Well, we didn't have revenue guarantees on Sun Country. But we do know that they operated, Phoenix operated around 84% full, and Fort Myers was about 78% full over the full 2 full years that they did it.
Even post the hurricane.
Yeah, even after the hurricane, actually, Fort Myers still did well, which we begged them to move it to Orlando, and they said, no, we think it'd do okay, and it did quite well. Again, we're victims of circumstance there, but yeah, we know these particular routes were supported, and we have the fare day. We know the revenue. We don't have Sun Country's direct cost information, but we can surmise that they were profitable.
Thank you.
Right, Councilmember Keen?
Yeah, thank you. Again, there's some key learning here, and I'm glad to see, the things I pulled out of some of the major shifts between the business travel going towards leisure travel and how that like changes some of the destinations. That's important for us to understand. I guess I took it, maybe you didn't mean to do this, but the name of the game in the industry now is filling the planes versus providing options. Like they are reducing the options to fill the planes. And the other one, there is this business model that you're approaching us with, and it exists on this minimum revenue guarantees. We did have the thing in the back of our packet showing like what money we could have, and that's again, as City Administrator Zelm says, that's really just talking about an option we have. But I guess when you show us this 33% and you have these 2 new destinations, and let's assume that we're flying them more than 4 or 5 times a week, what do you think we need to have as a minimum guarantee to draw 2 new destinations into Rochester in the next year?
The shorter the timeline, the higher the number. Eventually, the pilot situation will come to homeostasis, and what we will see is still minimum revenue guarantees, but the pressure on the number will go down. I would like to see 1.5 for 2 routes on an expedited timeline. That's what I really think. And in terms of scheduling, really the reason the options are reduced is because there aren't enough pilots to fly the smaller planes. That means fewer connections every day. So I think the airlines would really like to fly them more. They just can't right now. And a lot of that's because the pilots are going to the carriers that we're targeting with this new strategy.
So I didn't come away with what I wanted there, but going back on this, if you think that if we found a way to have $1.5 million available for a contract, we could get 2 additional destinations. I'm going to make them up. It's one of them is Phoenix and one is Dallas, and we could have that going N number of days a week.
Well, Dallas is a separate project. That
Okay, whatever.
Let's say it's Orlando and Phoenix. Yeah,
Okay.
The goal is 1 carrier.
Yep. 2
2
destinations.
destinations, probably starting twice a week in both and growing day of week as we prove them all.
Starting twice a week, and it's that same day as well, down and then come back.
Same day.
Yeah, it's the same day. And just again, in this conversation, is this sort of like let's put a flyer on something that might work, or is this an 80% chance of working without spending the minimum guarantee?
I think in all likelihood, we'll use some of the guarantee because what we've seen in other markets is very, very low introductory fares to get the word out. We're talking like $29 to Orlando. So we're filling the plane, but that's not a high enough fare to make money. That's okay, as long as that only lasts a couple of months, because then you make more in the future months, it offsets it a little bit. But It's very rare. So of all the revenue guarantees that I have right now, I have one that's not using any of the money at all, or didn't use any at the very beginning. I think we will use money at the beginning. I
Okay.
think these are long-term sustainable routes.
In this idea of like, there's a negotiation with an airline and an airport, and there's this thing in there. What are the 5 things being discussed? Is it the term is 2 years? Can you give me like the key parts of where it's?
First is the routes and the business case for the routes.
Yep.
Does it make sense? Second is what days of the week should be flown.
Yep.
And we have a lot of data on that. The third is what is the available revenue guarantee? What's the total available money? Then they'll forecast, come back to us. The fourth is at that money, here is the target revenue we need to fly this schedule with this airplane at these times. So then, based on our negotiations
Yep,
with
up
the
to that.
same carrier before, we have an idea of the number is accurate or not. They also have to file that to the DOT. So we negotiate an agreeable number, and then we sign the contract based on
Okay.
that.
And the idea, I'm just gonna make this up. This goes on for 2 years, and the idea is it's done then, or is it is there re-up?
2 years, and if it works, service stays, and if it doesn't, well, I'll tell you how most of them go.
Yeah.
You usually know in about 3 months if it's gonna work or not, because you can see in the numbers it's improving. The ones that I've had that have not worked at all, I've known in a month that they were dead because no one was getting on the plane. You can tell very, very quickly. So if it's not working at all, we're probably going to negotiate with the carrier to end the service before the guarantee is exhausted. There's no reason to waste money on something that nobody's going to use.
Okay.
I
So
think
it is
we'll
like
know
a
quickly.
bootstrap. It is a bootstrap fund.
That's exactly what it is. We're not looking for a subsidy.
Yep. Okay. This is, again, just your analysis. It really is enlightening for looking at it as if, I have to take a little bit of time to accept the fact that this is our 1,600 passengers versus individuals who make decisions. But it is a good way to look at it. But as Councilmember Bransford brings up, it kind of ignores that individual consumer decision-making. And it kind of says like there are percentages and we're just going to move them from this over to here by not having groom ride up to the cities, 23 times a day. And I think these things that bring up on that individual decision-making, even that idea that if they're going to have, it works well for the existing ones to get us to O'Hare or Minneapolis at 5:15 in the morning. And those are the kind of things we work with. And I think that's how this is going to work. It's that they're going to use us to bring passengers on those routes to their hubs. But these ones we're talking about is to the final destination. Is there different decision-making in that for the consumer that really is price-based?
It's price-based and it's convenience-based. So if you can fly nonstop and you don't have to deal with O'Hare or MSP, that's already a win. And you're not as worried about, misconnecting or having to rush. The plane's coming here. There's not another option, MSP. It's coming here. That helps. The other thing to know, like Orlando, we have 85 people a day who fly to Orlando from here. 85. The vast majority drive to MSP. We actually only need a small proportion of those to make the decision to fly out of here on a different carrier. And the people who are driving to MSP, they really don't care what carrier they're on. They're going on fare. Our fare is going to be at worst the same in this case with this type of carrier. So what we've seen in other markets, we haven't seen a degradation of the network service because they're different passengers. The network passenger is the one who has to be there on that time, doesn't have flexibility, loves Delta and only will fly Delta. What we are doing is we're getting the passengers who would otherwise don't care about the airline, just want the fare and the schedule. And we're getting people who wouldn't travel anyway. What these numbers don't take into account, all the new people are going to travel. I mean, if somebody's got grandparents living down near Orlando now, they're going to come and see the grandkids, 10 times a year instead of 5. That's
Okay.
what happens.
So I guess, again, I think as a council member looking at this kind of thing, I think there's I'm still trying to understand the industry thing with the airline industry, trying to figure out how they're going to maximize stuff. Then you've got consumers, and in between there, you've got airports. So that's our responsibility here. There is a compelling argument here that there's a value to the citizens of Rochester to have these sort of travel options. But I'm still trying to get my head around putting capital at risk and what the pressures are on the other side to say, how am I going to get access to that? And am I going to do things that, as Councilmember Bransford says, the options you provided aren't what I need. I can just get on the shuttle and do something. So with those things in mind, I consider this promising for us, but I don't know exactly where I'm at with it yet. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Norton.
Okay, so I have some things that probably aren't going to be popular, and I have some things that I think might be popular. One is I booked a flight recently, and it was $150 cheaper to fly out of Rochester than out of Minneapolis. So hooray, right? I've also had the experience this past week where my plane didn't take off and I missed my conference. So yes, right? So I'm trying to get my head around if this is the best and biggest thing we need in our city to spend our money on. So I'm kind of coming at it from, we have very limited dollars. Is this where we want to spend it? So got a couple questions. One is, you talked about how flight has shifted post-pandemic. I don't doubt that for a second. I know people who held off for vacations for 3 years and are now vacationing. I question whether in the long run, that's going to be the continued mode of people's transportation is, I'm going on vacation. At some point, they're going to get their 2 or 3 vacations they missed, and they're going to start slowing down and saying, and I'm assuming there'll be some pickup for work, moving on. So what happens if everything shifts and people get their vacations out of their way and they don't want a vacation anymore, and they're going to pare back their vacation travel and pick up their work travel?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell you in terms of, we get booking information in terms of next 11 months of booking, we see no sign of any slowdown. We see only acceleration. And the only thing that's hurting the acceleration in booking for airline travel right now is the lack of seats. The airlines simply don't have enough seats across their networks to satisfy where the demand is right now. Say we lose 50% of demand overnight. We still have 800 people a day that would be traveling out of Olmsted County and into Olmsted County. So 800 in and 800 out. And we're operating at 300 seats a day. We still have a gap of 500. So we're only with this going to fill a very small gap between our total demand and available capacity. So while I think that travel has changed completely, I think what we will see is people are traveling by air more often than they used to. They don't want to miss graduations. They don't want to miss birthdays anymore. And so they continue to travel. Even if our market collapses by half, we have more than enough we could still support that 33%. It would just become our 66%.
Okay. I'm not convinced that people are going to keep vacationing forever, but okay, if they do, that's great, and we all deserve a break, so I'm fine with that. I have a little bit of question about the numbers that you gave us. You said 86% of people go to Minneapolis, only 14% are flying out of here. You also said of those flying out of Rochester, only 10% are patients and 10% are residents, local. Of the 86%,
Employees of Mayo
Mayo
Clinic.
employees, 10%,
10% Mayo employees
10% patients.
and 10% patients. Okay. So do we know then of the 86% flying out of the cities, how many, because we had the big push for a while with Mayo, and I know they've still asked their employees to fly out of Rochester. Of the 86%, more than 10%, we have 10%, but what's the percent of Mayo employees that are flying out of the Twin Cities?
So there's still a fly RST policy. Mayo Clinic employees are still required to fly out of RST regardless of the campus on which they work. They're very difficult to meet exceptions to fly out of Minneapolis. Some still do, but it is a requirement to fly RST unless every flight gets canceled and you gotta go. So
So do you know the percent flying out of MS?
I know it's confidential. I am under a
Okay.
non-disclosure.
All right.
I would just say they do track it and go over it, and
We go
do
over it
have
very
a
frequently.
push.
Employee travel as a whole is very still.
Oh, I don't doubt that, but it feels like it's coming back. On the flights I've been on, they're full, and there are a lot of people doing business trips again. So that does feel like there's a little bit of a shift there. The other question I had, and this is one you may not like, but if Mayo Clinic patients are only 10% of our travel, I'm always amazed at how the Rochester airport feels like Mayo Clinic's airport. And if 80% of the people flying in and out aren't associated with Mayo Clinic, why can't it feel more like a Rochester airport and less like Mayo Clinic's or shared? Just a question I've had as I fly in and out all the time, right?
Sure. No, I mean, the municipality and the community as a whole is more than welcome to come do advertising or be a part of that. We're more than open and welcome to do that. That's our only partner that stepped up at the moment. We're here. We are open.
Okay, I
Okay.
think it's good to know that because
Yeah.
we don't necessarily market ourselves
Yeah.
at our airport. We market Mayo Clinic, which is fine, but if only 10% of the people are Mayo Clinic, that seems like kind of a big void that we're missing.
We have lots of space available on our electronic billboards. We're more than happy to participate and be a partner
Thank you for
with any
that.
and all.
Commercial.
It's our community. We're happy.
And Joe Ward is watching this from home.
All his alarm bells are going off right now. All right, Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. So, Mr. Reed, in our discussions, we have a new runway, a new lighting system. I understand that it's going to be so dependable, it's unbelievable. Is that what I remember?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're at stage 4 of 7 of a very deep investment, not only by this community, but by the Federal Aviation Administration, which, by the way, pays better than 90% of those costs for that total project. And just for everybody's, just a bit of edification on that, those dollars are accessible because we have commercial air service. If you lose commercial air service, you lose access to all those FAA airport improvement plan dollars. You literally go from a base of 1.3 million annually to about 150,000 annually. So it's very important as we look at the ecosystem of the airport as a whole, and how air service is a component, a very important component of that, but it also helps stand up the other components of aviation, which are again important to our community. That's cargo operations, heavy general aviation operations. Literally, we get aircraft that come in from around the world. And a lot of the improvements that we have in place, think runways, taxiways, instrument landing systems are all there because we can access those dollars.
So what I'm trying to say is from a marketing perspective, 5 years ago, if it was foggy, you didn't land, but now if it's foggy, you can land. Isn't that not?
Yeah, no. The instrument landing system brings our minimum descent altitudes. I'm going to go way too in the weeds for you here, from a half a mile off and 200 feet up to 100 feet off the ground and a quarter mile. So it has severely dropped the minimums that the pilots have to have for achieving a visual approach into that runway off of the instrument. So yes, good.
In
It's
Carpenter,
positive.
terms, if I get on at Orlando, I'm probably going to land in Rochester.
You're going to hit the nail on the head versus maybe missing the nail.
Okay, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. In part of your study, as far as the area we're trying to grab, you keep saying Olmsted County. I've never seen anybody fly the international airport at Dodge County. So why are we just Olmsted County?
Well, I think Jack was simplifying a little bit. We actually have a fairly larger catchment area where people do travel from. We'll pick people up out of Iowa and out of western Wisconsin. We do go up towards the cities, maybe not as far as I want to, and then we push over towards the cities along I-90 to the west.
And I would just say, when we study the data and we pull the tickets, we generally pull only Olmsted County because we want to be conservative in our forecasting. We want to ensure that any route that we're looking at could be supported, even if we only get the immediate area. On Sun Country, we drew from over 100 miles away.
Okay, so when you, part of the agreement that you like to have us do is if it's not working, you said I will know in a month. So how do you have that written in the guarantee that it failed, so we're out of this, so we don't lose?
Yeah, we will have a minimum of 90-day out, and we will have a minimum monthly reporting.
And so if we do $2 million and we have the revenue to be able to backstop this, I mean, we're not going to spend $2 million and walk away, but they'll chip away at it. Is that not the correct understanding?
If we spend $2 million, it was not going to work from the start. So I think your understanding, yes, is correct.
Probably have a different consultant.
No, well, you'd be surprised. It's usually, so I would be shocked in this case if that happened, but it's not out of the realm because every now and then we hit a massive recession. Every now and then there's a pandemic. I had a revenue guarantee start just before the pandemic. It burned the whole thing. No one could have seen it.
Or fuel prices.
Yeah, fuel prices explode. The Middle East, the tensions in the Middle East suddenly get much, much worse.
And I'm supportive of up to $2 million of revenue. To me, I think that makes more sense. And it's not that we're wasting any more money, but I think it might attract somebody a little bit quicker and better. The only thing in the last statement or a question or I'm puzzled by this is that we're at 10% patients. That just seems to be so low that how do we get more of that, or how do we get more employees traveling? And I understand that the employees aren't traveling as much. They're doing more Zoom and the other stuff. But boy, 10% seems awfully low.
Yeah.
Just seems to be what our
Well,
capture is.
yeah, so there's a few things that have happened with the pandemic, and part of it is the way patients travel. We used to see before the pandemic a lot of patients coming multiple times for procedures for one problem. Now we're seeing a lot more of that being taken care of in one trip. So that reduces the number of
So
flights.
pre-pandemic, what was the number for male patients?
I'd have to go back and look. I don't recall. It was significantly more than where we are today.
90% or?
Oh, no. No, we were never more than probably a quarter of total passengers.
Okay, so a quarter makes sense to me.
A quarter would be the maximum. But the way that the patients have traveled has changed. And there's also we were getting a lot of patients from Phoenix and Jacksonville before that now don't need to come here because of technology upgrades at those campuses.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, and you've answered my questions. And again, I like backfilling this, and I think to me, 2 million makes more sense, but I don't know what my colleagues are thinking. So I see Mr. Keene over there grimacing like a 2-year-old, but we're kind of used to that. Thanks.
I have so many comments, but I will pass it over to Councilmember Kirkpatrick, who has 7 questions. 8.
Maybe, some of them may have gotten answered. Thank you very much for the presentation and the information. I'd like a little more data. What percentage of the flights are canceled now? Both the mayor and Councilmember Bransford mentioned that they missed conferences. So what percentage of flights do we cancel?
So in 2023, our cancellation percentage was 0.6%. So 99.4% operated.
And mine was still at Kelly Ray, so I couldn't.
Okay, got it. Thank you. You had mentioned on slide 31 that the pilots are available. Pilots are available at other airports. But does the customer want to go to those other airports? Where does our customer want to go? And this is sort of addressing or looking at maybe that pilot shortage that we have. How are we going to get pilots here if the pilots want to be at those other places? I recall you talking about that with that particular.
Well, the pilots go by the airline. The airline
right yeah.
chooses where they want to fly based on commercial viability and incentives. Our 1 and 2 destinations. Phoenix is number 1, 90 people a day. Orlando is number 2. It's 85 people a day. So those are our number 1 and 2.
That's the demand from here.
Demand from here.
Okay.
And so that's really, that dovetails with the strategy.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. If use is down, I recall you talking about use being down everywhere across the nation. Why do we need more pilots? You had mentioned needing more pilots. There's not enough pilots.
Right.
It seems to me like the market is equalizing itself.
Actual demand, so that is searches for tickets, people trying to purchase tickets, is much greater than the current available number of seats. What's happened is airlines have been able to significantly raise fares because of that, which isn't bad for them, but overall demand is down. So you have new carriers like Breeze and Avello quickly taking on new planes to take advantage of the demand that the carriers who've had to shrink can no longer serve.
Got it. I missed that part. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
I didn't explain it very well, so I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad you explained that. Thank you. Just heard that our RCTC aviation program isn't going going very well. Was there some sort of a collaboration there to try and pump that up to get maybe some more local pilots that supply demand?
I can answer that. Never believe every headline that you do read. I think when you look at the RCTC program, I think it's going very well. This year alone, they brought on 15 new students, remembering they launched right at the edge of the pandemic. I think an unfair footing in the start. In furthering of that partnership, RCTC's brought on a coordinator to help get out into the community, begin to reach students at that high school level and begin to bring them into the system. I think the program's going very well. I'd look forward to a continued growth and future of that. It's a
Okay.
great opportunity for our local students.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Do you have the numbers on the MSP losses due to smaller airports?
I think it's a question of is there leakage from MSP to other airports?
Yeah, yeah. You
Uh,
said
I-
mentioned that MSP is losing.
Yeah,
Many are, but
every
Is it-
airport loses. I don't know the order of magnitude, but it would be hundreds a day that are driving out to other airports. from
going to the
MSP.
other
I
regional
mean, for
airports.
example, when Sun Country flew here, we saw a handful of people on every single flight that would drive from MSP to fly Sun Country out of here.
Okay. You answer that so easily, almost kind of off the cuff, which is, I guess, a bit concerning with the ask of such a large amount of money, but I understand what you're saying. That does make sense to me. Do we have, oh, not gonna ask that one. I think jumping off of what Councilmember Palmer had asked, you had partially answered this question about the patients and the treatment being a single treatment instead of subsequent visits that are necessary. But are the patients also driving so that they can navigate the city? Do you have any information on that? Do they want to have a vehicle when they're here? Perhaps due to, our not yet more viable public transportation system or services being out at the edges of the city, perhaps not downtown where they're staying, where most of our hospitality is. Do you have any information on that at all?
I think it's a mixed bag a little bit as it relates to what those particular patients' needs are. And it could be a difference of length of stay. Do they have other things to do while they are here? I will tell you that our car rental numbers and the revenue in particular is coming back to that pre-pandemic level. So the renting of cars is still pretty robust at our facility.
And I
Okay.
can say that generally, more patients are coming from drivable distances than before,
Mhm.
and fewer patients are coming from very, very far away.
Got it. Thank you.
And we monitor those numbers every month.
Okay, all right, that's nice, thank you. And then I guess my last question is, you had mentioned to Councilmember Palmer that the contracts have a 90-day out, but I think I heard you mention numerous times that you'll know within a month whether this is gonna be successful or
Uh,
not. So why wouldn't we want like a 45-day out?
Because then the airline can exercise that and could leave you high and dry if something better comes along real quick. So we have a nice little balance that we want
Okay,
without letting them out, but still protecting ourselves. And we are gonna give it more than a month. Even if the first month looks terrible, we're gonna wait for a second or third month to make sure that, something didn't change dramatically. But after a few, we'll have a good idea.
thank you.
Councilmember Dennis?
Okay, thank you. I have a couple clarifications. A lot of answers were given to the questions I had. So I appreciate the presentation. I do think it's a little low on some of the data, so I would like to look more thoroughly at some of the financials before making such a huge investment of taxpayer dollars. My one question is, when we were on our tour at one point at the runway expansion project, there was note that someone from the airport mentioned it was very essential for Mayo Clinic to have the airport here because it transports samples, lab samples. And so we have to have a lot of flights back and forth, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but almost every flight was essential because lab samples were stored underneath. And so it's very beneficial for Mayo Clinic to have more flights. Can you clarify my understanding of that? Thank you.
So the vast majority of the samples come on the 2 daily FedEx operations that we have. One from Memphis and one from Indianapolis. That would be where the vast majority. I'm not saying that there's not some on a Delta or an American flight, but the numbers are going to be pretty minuscule.
Okay, so there are not essential use of the airlines for transportation for mails, products.
I would
and-
not say on a normal basis.
But I would just add to that, without the commercial carriers, generating parking revenue and all of those things, you can't really operate the airport, which means those FedEx planes can't land, which means that no samples can get here. So that I would say that the reason those commercial flights are so critically important is the revenue they generate that helps support the airport.
Okay, yeah, and I know for a world famous hospital, having an international airport is probably very, very beneficial to Mayo. So I understand that as well. Some of the little things I picked up during your presentation, and Councilmember Kirkpatrick mentioned this, the smaller airports picking up revenue. You mentioned two airports, and you mentioned Duluth and Fargo. I quickly just Google mapped it, right? Duluth is 3 hour, if you from City Hall, is 3 hours and 52 minutes. I'm sorry, Fargo is 3 hours and 52 minutes, and Duluth is 2 hours. Oh, I'm sorry, Fargo is 3 hours and 52 minutes from MSP, and Duluth is 2 hours and 24 minutes from NSP. And right here in City Hall is only 1 hour and 23 minutes. So we have, sorry, my numbers are, but everything from MSP, okay, I'm sorry about my numbers, but you look at, we are so much closer than Fargo and Duluth. So it makes a little sense why people are going to use Fargo if they're in that area, use Duluth if they're in that area, and why it's so complicated here in Rochester. Because let's say we are waiting for our flight, because Rochester, to my knowledge, employees, staff, elected officials are required to use our local airport, which I have mixed feelings about, because if the plane ticket is more higher here, why aren't we helping taxpayer funds and making sure that we utilize and be good stewards of taxpayer funds and find the cheapest plane ticket? So I do have a little issue with requiring elected officials and staff to use this airport, because we are using taxpayer funds, unlike other companies that use other revenue. But my question all over the place is, I was waiting in the MSP airport with Mayor Norton, and our flight, there were some issues with flight. We waited hours there. Everything had shut down at MSP, and we kind of were joking around saying, we could have easily just jumped here, got back to Rochester, but we had to wait many hours in layover together while we waited for our flight. Can we really honestly compare places like Duluth and Fargo to Rochester? Because Rochester is so quick. I mean, if you look 1 hour and 23 minutes from our seat right here to Terminal 1 is really quick compared to layovers that I have experienced waiting for a flight back. I'm sorry. That was
I think it's a great point,
question.
because that's our essential, isolation is the best friend of a regional airport. And we don't have it. And that's why it's so much more difficult to get the right air service here. It's because we're so close, and we fight against one of the biggest hubs in the United States with Delta there and Sun Country and everybody fighting it out and low fares. We're never going to have service that is going to look like MSP, and we're always going to fight that challenge, which is why it's so important, I think, that our strategy focuses on things that we think we can win the battle against the drive.
I see that. I guess there's been talks about having trains or fast commutes or electric buses or some other ways of bridging the gap between here and Rochester to that hour and 23 minutes, which might be outside the box and trying to put millions and millions into our airport currently to fill a need that many people will still not use. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think maybe we shouldn't be looking always at putting more money into the airport as we should be putting into alternative transportation to the cities, if that is maybe what our residents want. So that's one thought. And then
Elms wanted
Could I
to
just
respond to that.
respond to that quickly, because I do think it's just important to point out the financial mix of the airport. We will continue to operate Rochester International Airport for 20 years. Every time we make an investment in the airport. So every time we take the $1.3 million for operating from the FAA, every time that we do any sort of project, every time that we accept the $200,000 grant, which we just did for advertising The airport is like $1 billion investment that the city has made over time and all of the residents have made over time. And so making sure that it is a viable place for people to be able to use and keeps it as an enterprise operating as a business where there isn't tax dollars associated. The federal government will not care if there are property tax dollars flowing to the airport. They will care that we meet our commitments to operating it because the vast majority of the investment at the airport every year is coming from the federal government. So while people may have different ways to get to Minneapolis, the airport is trying to be where you can get to the rest of the world from. And so what the strategy here is to try to make more low-cost direct flights available to people so that that concern about laying over in Minneapolis isn't a concern at all because they're going directly to their destination to and from Rochester. So that is actually the strategy, is trying to avoid all of the very well-made points that you made. And the airport is a critical infrastructure billion-dollar asset that the city of Rochester owns, operates, has to continue to maintain. And but for the commercial service that's being described, there would not be the financial viability of the cargo that is critical, not just to Mayo Clinic, but our second largest employment base in the region is manufacturing. And all of those planes also bring all of the other cargo for all of the other businesses, as well as your personal mail, et cetera, that you're getting. And without the types of runways that we have for commercial, we would not have 2 dedicated flights a day for FedEx. I can tell you that most of those places on the map that were shown that talked about commercial service do not have the type of cargo commitments that Rochester International Airport has and all of the different businesses that rely on it. So I just think it's critical to clarify the financial aspects of the airport, or trying to keep it as an enterprise fund and to avoid spending general tax dollars. And that's also why it's so important to fly out of Rochester, because then it's supporting itself and isn't relying much on the tax dollar at all.
And the tax dollars that are going to the state and the federal government, we're having so much success because of John's team, because of our city team, in bringing those back to invest in our airport. And we have this new runway and all this other investment that we want to be sure that we're utilizing and have to be utilizing for 20 years every time we receive a new grant. So back to you, Councilmember Dennis.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just a clarification. You said region. I can't argue. I don't know the stats on that, but the second largest employer in Rochester, I believe, is a school district, which many have poverty level wages. And so dollars is far more important than convenience to many people that I have worked with in the Rochester School District. They will drive to the cheapest flight. My other note is listening to the presentation, and like I said, there's a lot of questions I have in your actual, the information here. But you said a lot of these assuming things. We assume a profitable market. So I want to, when I go back and rewatch these study sessions, as I often do, I'll kind of pick up more of all these words. But I feel there's so much assuming being done, and I'm still a little bit unsure about how we are going to be let out of contracts and be let out of things, or how other airports, the airlines, if we are taking millions of dollars of taxpayer, and we're talking about using the holistic fund, the general fund, these are resident property taxes. And if we're using those property taxes on something that hopefully, wishfully, we really do hope will make profits, but it seems like we're gambling with taxpayer dollars. And if we're gambling, not really sure if what we're doing is going to produce more seats, more flights, like more people traveling. I just want to know, I'm not a gambler myself, definitely not with other people's money, but to do what's best with residents' hard-earned dollars, what are the odds? What happens if there is an airline that signs up and then says, where we'll take and they pull out, or, what guarantee, when we invest taxpayer dollars in a sustainable energy source, we have a pretty good guarantee it's going to help in the long term, lower emissions. We can have scientific proof saying this is a good investment. Can you help lower or ease the anxiety of residents who feel that this is a gamble with their tax dollars?
Well, we've had very similar service, almost exact service before. That service, as we talked about, produced 84% of seats filled on Phoenix, 78% seats filled on Fort Myers. Orlando is a much larger market than Fort Myers. When we forecast the market, it forecasts profitable at their cost. But there's a lot of uncertainty because we don't know what economic conditions will be. Say it starts next March. Will we be in a recession when it starts, having already signed a contract? Will we be in another pandemic? Will bird flu jump over to people? We can't guarantee any of those things. And because of that, we go in understanding that the money is at risk. If I could sit here and say there's no risk, then you all would have a very easy decision to make. There's risk in this. It is risk. It's risk against the value, which is the new visitor revenue, which is the money saved by residents when they're traveling, which is the ability of people to get to and fro for business. That's the value. If all goes perfectly, that money goes right back to where it came from, or it becomes a self-sustaining fund, which is what many communities have now. But I can't guarantee that it will.
Thank you. Councilmember Bransford.
So looking at the two destinations that we're picking makes sense to me on two different levels. Vacations, like Mayor Norton mentioned, I want to go to Phoenix this summer. I'm flying out of Minneapolis, right? If this were here, I'd fly out of Rochester, assuming it was on time. And so that $24 airfares is a good way to build up trust that way, by the way. If you can get butts in seats at cheap fares, you can show that we can operate reliably. So just a little aside. So I understand also that there's two big Mayo campuses very near Orlando and one in Phoenix. So I get the choice. I'm having a little trouble with table on page 34, where you talk about new visitor spending metrics. So having that preamble, Mayo traffic, vacations, how, if I go on vacation, I'm spending my money at Disney World or in Phoenix. We're not having people coming here to vacation. They're either, right? So help me understand. So if I'm saying, okay, yep, let's spend $1.5 million or even $2 million, does that mean Rochester could possibly make $5.2 million in ROI?
So you would be surprised. On our Phoenix,
It may be.
on our Phoenix service with Sun Country, 38% of passengers originated in Phoenix and were coming here. 38%. On Fort Myers, it was 30% of passengers. Those areas have huge collections of people who used to live here and now live there, but their rest of their family still lives here. So the vast majority of this spending is from visiting what we call VFR, visiting friends and relatives. Visiting friends and relatives is the single largest segment of air traffic in the world. It's almost 60% of everyone on an airplane. Vacation in business are tiny compared to going to see somebody we know.
So you have the data.
Yep. So we base this on those. And we also know on every single place that we know every single ticket anyone buys in or out of this county, period. We know what airline, we know what day, we know what you spent, we know where you connected. So we looked at specifically Las Vegas. How many people in that city pair, Rochester to Las Vegas, come from Las Vegas? And it's a little less than 20% in that case. So it's not very many. There are not many people who bought houses there, but Phoenix is huge.
Okay, so that said, I mean, that's great. I'm far more comfortable with this model if these numbers are solid and based on real data. I mean, to me, that's the ROI is potentially quite high.
And I would just note the visitor data is from what is it called now? Experience Rochester?
Experience Rochester.
I go to too many different.
All right, this is where the rubber hits the road in my mind. I mean, all the other discussion is great, but really it's just what's the ROI if we do this, right? That table tells the tale and you have the data to support these numbers. That makes me a lot more comfortable.
I can send you the whole forecast behind it if you'd like.
I would like to see that.
I can.
I'm a data guy.
I'll send it over. Yeah.
All right, we have just a couple more, and then we're going to take a quick break before we transition to bus rapid transit, as I know there's some of our team members that are on short schedules. So go ahead, Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. So jumping off of what you asked, Mark, that was important to me too. Of those folks that are returning home, the other VFR, not the VFR that the airport typically knows, but the visitor VFR, what percentage of those folks then are Mayo employees or used to be Mayo employees? So that to me seems like a pretty interesting breakdown.
Is a huge number who used to be.
Yeah,
So it's not as much in Jacksonville, but in Phoenix, so many employees worked at both, kept their house in Phoenix and go back and forth. It
Okay.
is, I don't have an exact number, but I can tell you there are 4,000 families from Olmsted County that own a house in Maricopa County in Arizona. 4,000.
so that's that flip part of the data that I was curious about when you were asking the questions, like, all right, who are these people? Okay, yeah, well, it's the data, right? It's the benchmarking. So jumping off of a couple other points that were made. Is this a Rochester airport or is this a Mayo airport? I appreciate what Mayo does. They're top notch. Everything looks great. It's beautiful. I think the level of experience at the Rochester airport, since Mayo has become its pretty much sole sponsor, has gone up significantly. I like the way it looks, but when I'm there, I wonder too, wow, is this a Mayo airport or a Rochester airport? But I don't care because the experience level is up. That's what they do, right? That's what Mayo is known for. But if these samples are so incredibly important commercially for FAA funding, more so than people travel, why isn't Mayo funding this? Why isn't Mayo stepping up for the 1.5 or the 2 million?
So I would just say that they are, like, I think I can say publicly that they are a partner on the Dallas minimum revenue guarantee that is very directly related to business travel. We will be talking to Mayo, but this is really more a leisure travel strategy in order to continue to insulate the community against long-term costs of the airport. So, and I just want to sort of clarify something. The cargo is very important, but for the passenger, we wouldn't have the type of runways and the type of amenities at the airport, the general aviation services, partners like Great Plains, who was here earlier, who does the mechanical work and is expanding their services at the airport. So it becomes sort of this ripple effect that, but for that commercial service, you wouldn't have all of that cargo and the dedicated flights. And so that's why it is so important to look at it, not just as one or the other. Without the three legs of the stool, it can't function, or it will require continuous subsidy way far. I mean, we have a very, very small subsidy for our airport relative to almost any of those airports that are on the map, even with a minimum revenue guarantee. Most airports require a fair amount, maybe 10 to 20% of their, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. Most airports require about 10 to 20% at least subsidy from the local community in order to operate, and many have much more than that. So most communities don't have an MSP, right? They have something more like what we have, and they do send significant amount of general taxes to be able to support what the airport can't support itself. So we're trying to avoid that. But Mayo has been a partner on these in the past, and we have provided some information to them. But again, this isn't that daily service. This would be like twice a week. So it may have some value, but they likely wouldn't be the first in for something like this.
Okay, thanks.
Quick question before I hand it over to Councilmember Keen to wrap us up. So you talked about marketing dollars, that we know that we have resources from the federal grant coming in, but do the airlines then contribute directly to marketing their own, or what's the responsibility?
Some are very aggressive and some do nothing. The ones we're targeting tend to be very aggressive
Okay,
with their
great.
own funds. It's funny, the big ones, the Deltas, Americans, Uniteds tend to say it's up to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't need to be allocating additional resources to marketing.
We will, and
Okay.
we have a fund for
Yeah,
that.
we budget annually
Yeah.
for just for this case. So we have dollars set aside in our budget. We use them if we need to, and we don't spend them if we do.
Okay, got it. Thank
In
you.
all likelihood, the marketing will be done with the carrier, with the carrier's direction. So it won't be us on our own.
Great. Okay, Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, two things, to tie it up here. I just want to make a comment and then a kind of a question, it's a leading question. But first, I just want to make sure, I think it's well established that this council totally supports the airport being the Rochester International Airport. And we have many different users of it, but it's a city asset. And we're also kind of committed to the enterprise business model. And I think that's working well for the citizens of Rochester too. And let's be more blunt, the taxpayers. So with that said, we're coming and talking about ways to improve the passenger side or the retail side. Not, all these other businesses are run there, but this is the one that we're talking about trying to improve, and we're talking about putting city money at risk to do it. I want to make sure, like, if you look over the last 5-10 years and we brought in Sun Country and it didn't work, or we brought in these other ones, what have we learned from that we're applying to how we're going forward?
A lot is in the narrative. Sun Country was very profitable here. It was a decision that they made. They have a set fleet to take 12 aircraft out of the fleet. They closed all of their stations outside of MSP to leisure destinations. Green Bay lost service, Duluth lost service, we lost service. So that was a strategic decision to take a guaranteed profit from Amazon over the smaller profit here. In terms of United, that was the pandemic. We were having great success. They had added Denver service. It ran out of pilots. They retired 250 planes in 1 month, and 38 cities lost service. We were on the unfortunate end on both of those cases. Our service has traditionally been well supported by the region and profitable.
No, that's what I expected to hear. There wasn't any minimum revenue guarantees involved in those?
Sun Country, there was not, no, not on the United
Okay.
Chicago either.
Okay.
That was fully at United's own risk.
So I mean, we're certainly taking an airport perspective on this, and I'm glad to it. But I think what you've heard from some of us is the customer and their buying patterns are all affected by these different things. Sometimes it's pure price, and I've seen people make huge mistakes just buying on price instead of on the convenience and other things. And I'm in that camp myself. But I also want us to go in with an idea of, like, what are the airlines and how are they approaching this, and are we fitting into their business model? But again, I'm supportive of what we're trying to do.
I think that's why we have Volair, who's an expert working with the airline industry to figure this out with us. All right. Well, thank you so much for all the time and thoughtful presentation, and excited to see it come back as an agenda item.
Thank you for your time and your questions, your interest. Deeply appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you. All right, so we will take a very quick break, come back just a couple minutes after 5. If you need a few more minutes, that's fine, but we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation at just about 5:02.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back. Hi, Cindy Steinhauser. Is it just you presenting for your team today, or
Thank you.
tell us who your team is?
Carlson, we actually have our outside counsel, Rachel Tierney from Kennedy and Graves. She is
Your
on.
mic. No.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Council President Carlson. Cindy Steinhauser, Deputy City Administrator. Also with me is Ia Zhang, who is our interim transit and parking services director. And online is outside counsel Rachel Tierney from Kennedy and Graves. And in the interest of time, because we only have Rachel till 5:15, we're going to go straight to slide number 7, which is the operating agreement and exhibits slide. And then I can just catch up on some other items, updates at the end. So you'll recall that in August of 2022, a really monumental event happened in that the city and Mayo agreed to a operating services agreement. Included in that agreement was Exhibit E, which called for the creation of additional documents specifically related to operating services for Link Bus Rapid Transit, specifically the coordination of construction activities, shared use facilities, and also a post-termination contingency plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, who is online, to walk us through those 3 exhibits and kind of where we're at in terms of final language. So Rachel, are you able to hear?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm sorry for being so remote for this meeting. I'd hoped to be there in person, but it just didn't work out. But I just we're excited to talk to you today about these agreements. Been working with city staff about them for a long time. As Cindy mentioned, you've approved back in 2022 the services agreement, which some people call the operating agreement. And when that agreement was created, we knew that our work wasn't quite completely done and that there were some further details that needed to be fleshed out. And so the contracts I'm here to talk about today are exactly that, just subsidiaries, if you will, of the operating agreement that kind of flesh out the remaining of the responsibilities and what all the parties need to do. So the first document is regulating the coordination of construction activities. And that document just further describes the relationship from the time that the plans are almost complete, or really pretty soon now, up until the time that services on the link route actually begin. That coordination construction agreement or document maintains the current project management system that's in place. And that project management involves a team from Mayo, the city, and DMC. They've all been working together to get the plans established and laid out. And this work group will continue that level of cooperation through the construction process, including final approval of plans. It also describes the construction contracting process, so issuance of the RFP and those kind of details. And then finally, outlines how those parties are going to cooperate in the event, probably likely event in a construction project of this size, how the cooperation will happen for changes during the construction project, acknowledging there's a lot going on. Mayo will be constructing West Transit Village and then just along this corridor to make sure that everything can stay on pace. The next document regulates the shared use of facilities. This document and the documents I'm talking about are kind of going in chronological order. So once construction ends and operations begin, this shared use of facilities document kicks in, and that covers everything after the services start. Now, I should say the vast majority of how everything is going to operate during construction is in the operations agreement itself. So this is just a little bit more drilled down in some areas to provide some further clarity. Try to draft it with a very long lens because this agreement could last, well, ideally will last for the next 40 years. So this is trying to do that long lens. There are certain permitted uses for Mayo over the life of this agreement, and those uses can't interfere with link operations, but still we thought it was important to explain what they can do. They can continue certain shuttle services. And then also, they may need to use the link route or a station occasionally for urgent situation or other health administration reasons. And finally, the agreement gives some detailed general operations, utilities, signage, security, day-to-day maintenance, and then how will we manage coordination of construction or repairs between the parties because of the level of overlap during the life of the agreement. And then at some point, we may need to upgrade or replace or maintain some of the infrastructure. And again, this agreement provides a little more detail on how that will be coordinated. Finally, the agreement, there is a document that contains it's called the post-termination planning. Now, we all hope that everything will go well, but surprises happen. And so this agreement is created in the event that the services agreement terminates early. It outlines the process to determine how will the facilities be used once they're once the relationship is unwound. The city obviously will continue to own and operate. Mayo employees and visitors are still going to have a need to get from parking facilities to the Mayo campus. And then in order for those two things to be coordinated, this outlines how Mayo will share in their share of the costs in the event that the services agreement is terminated. It lays out kind of what I would call the unwinding, but then also the creation of a new relationship, creates what we call a post-termination operations committee. So really, this is kind of another way to coordinate between the parties to make sure that all the decisions get made. It requires everybody to determine what their level of use will be. There's an agreement that the services will not be reduced if there's need. The agreement calls for development of an ongoing 5-year plan, guarantees that transit will still run. It requires the development of a transit schedule, and then it requires development of certain budgets, an operations budget, a capital budget, an improvement budget, and how the parties would all work together and how the costs will be shared within all of those. I realize that's super high level, and I'm probably talking faster than I realize, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. And so I just want to, in terms of wrapping it up, it's you, as we said, you approved that agreement in August of 2022. That was a critical a milestone for us to achieve in terms of the resubmittal for our small starts application. And now that we're continuing to make our way and advance through the FTA approval process, as they're looking at all of the information, the plans, the agreements, the materials, we will be providing them these additional exhibits as part of that readiness review. And these will come back to you for your consideration. So with that, if there's questions while we have Rachel, it would be great to ask them.
Just to clarify, these are completed already or in process? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
I'm sorry, that's a really good question. They are, I think we have an I to dot or a T to cross,
Okay.
but literally that's it. They have been fully drafted.
And so we would get them to FTA for their review. That way, if FTA has comments, and we can make those revisions prior to bringing them to you. Is that correct, Rachel? That's my understanding of the process.
Yeah, that's mine too, is that the FTA prefers to do their review. They want to review the final draft, but they don't want it to be approved or signed in the event that they have comments or revisions that they're requesting.
Okay, but as far as the Mayo and city working together, there's agreement on where we are today.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Other questions for Rachel? Councilmember Dennis?
Okay, just a note that the closed captioning is not on. It got turned off between the two presentations. So myself, I like to kind of look, as well as many people I think who have a need for that. It might be good to note for this presentation and further ones. So yeah, I'm kind of frantically taking notes here because I looked over the council packet and the operation agreement is to provide further clarity, but I'm not sure how much deep knowledge the council has on the details of this agreement. We trust experts. We trust that people are thoroughly looking this over. I know I brought up this notion of potential conflict of interest where you have people who have vested interest in both the city and in Mayo. And so who's reviewing this besides the FTA? Are there the city staff? I mean, is there an outside source that has no investment in Mayo, no investment in the city, also taking a look at this to make sure that people are covered? Because taxpayers, if this is terminated, I mean, this is a lot of money, a lot of investment, a lot of reliance on transportation. And then just to make sure that people are protected to have that level of service and not have their fees increased, not have things done that are, not foreseen.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'll be happy to answer. So again, the agreement that was approved in August of 2022, that was approved here at the council table. Happy to provide you a copy of that agreement so you can be reminded of what's all included in that. That was literally years of work that involved many teammates from the city team, negotiating parties on the part of Mayo, their outside counsel, and our outside counsel. So the similar team is working on the exhibits associated with those operating agreements. So Rachel is our outside counsel from Kennedy and Gravens, who has been the one that's been providing some critical guidance and really helped us reach some important milestones and got us to the finish line with the agreement in August of 2022 and to where we're at today working with Mayo's outside counsel.
And I know Rachel needs to leave, so thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel. Look forward to seeing this in all these pieces in their full form.
Well, and hopefully I can be there in person at some point to see you all. If there are any follow-up questions and you want to forward those through to Cindy, I'm happy to help her get answers for you too. But thank you so much for allowing me to be so brief.
Of course. All right. Well, Cindy, take us back to where you want to speak.
Sure. Well, the beginning slides were really just reminder slides
Okay.
of the numbers behind BRT. Just in terms of upcoming milestones, again, we are well into the FTA review process. We've got we're currently being reviewed by the project management oversight consultant. That is also a third party, neutral third party that FTA selects to come in and give their analysis of our project. And they look at everything from, well, it's a very robust review process. It looks at agreements. It looks at all kinds of things. Yeah, our documents, our designs, our market analysis, everything. So we are in that review right now. Then we have our FTA readiness in the first week of June, marching towards an award by late summer, early fall with an agreement, hopefully by the end of the year. I will say, really, really exciting news. As of last week, we received the remaining apportionment of the federal share that we need for this project. So that means we have 100% of the federal share apportioned for this project. That is, again, really a testament to the team of people that have been working on this for years, that we're advancing through a small starts grant application process and have locked that in. So that's a really great milestone. So
Congratulations.
hats off to you for
so wonderful.
It doesn't come without really great, clear policy guidance, which you have provided when you've approved these things like the services agreement and other updates. So
Thank you for sharing that news, Councilmember Bransford.
So just so that I get my head wrapped around what that means in terms of the remainder of the apportionment, that basically means the FTA portion of this is in a pot ready to go.
yes, it's apportioned to us. And so then we get the award. Yes, it's set aside,
Okay.
I guess is
So
a
that's a
safer term.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's a.
yeah. It's not just
huge.
me, whole bunch
All-
of people.
all of
including-
Well, yeah.
Yes,
to the- yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, just, I know we didn't need to go over the route and all that. We've been pretty well versed in it. But I read something, or went back looking at other things, and I had, there's, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops in the middle, and then there's 2 ends. Are there 12 different platforms or 12 different, because on the east, on the north and south side of the street on the stops, and then the termination on either end? Or are those considered one platform at the 19th
No,
Avenue?
Yeah, no, when you see, so you'll see on this map, you see 7 dots, so 7 station locations, 12 platforms, which
Yep.
means there's the eastbound and westbound on, in the middle, and at the end, it's one station.
Yeah,
right on either
okay,
west
and the
side.
terminations are one station.
Mhm.
All right, good, and it wasn't in here, but so it's 12 total platforms.
Correct, 12 platforms,
Thank you.
7 station locations.
All right, any other questions, comments? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, yes. All right, so I think we have our parks team to talk us through some.
They're going to bring you all the way into the weeds.
I was gonna say, to the weeds, to propose changes to the Rochester Code of Ordinances for tall grass and weeds.
Yes.
Vote is off.
Mike, you have to press the button.
Yep.
Oh, thank you, Mayor and Council President, council members. We are happy to be the least exciting item on the agenda today. We hope to be brief. We are here to discuss changes proposed. I'm so glad you are excited. I misread the room. Changes to tall grass and weed ordinances, and this is being to put us in alignment with recent changes to state statute. And Jeff Haberman, our city forester, will walk you through that, and we'll be prepared to answer any questions at the end of that. We have Mike Nigber, Parks and Forestry Division Head, Allison Litchie, our forestry supervisor as well. She is instrumental in actually enforcing the ordinance and is a very valuable resource for the questions of what that looks like to our residents. So I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Council President, Mayor, council members. So as Paul mentioned, I'm just going to kind of go through a history and how this ordinance has evolved over time, and then introduce the new state statute and talk about how that's going to impact our enforcement of Chapter 8.5. So initially, this code was established in 1965. The intent was to preserve the city's neighborhoods, public health, safety, and welfare of those who live there. At that time, vegetation was not allowed to exceed 10 inches in height anywhere within 200 feet of a developed parcel within city limits. We've always enforced the noxious weed law, and the ordinance recognized the benefit of diverse biological landscapes and allowed properly managed natural landscapes with a permit. And up until now, we have always required that permit. There were exemptions for wetlands, for 50-foot buffers within storm ponds, creeks, rivers, anything that conveyed water, just for water quality purposes. Agriculturally zoned lands were exempt. Steep slopes greater than 2-to-1 slopes were exempt, and erosion control and ornamental grasses were exempt. From 2013 to 2018, we've had multiple discussions with council over those years. Some of the concerns and question raised were, why are we managing this on private property? The amount of time that we allowed for mitigation, which we have changed. What is the proper height of the vegetation? How to address repeat offenders, how to help people with property maintenance challenges, and then how to avoid getting involved with neighbor versus neighbor conflicts, which does happen. So some of the operational changes made over that time, while we have always recognized the benefit of diverse biological landscapes and properly managed naturalized landscapes, at one point we had both a natural landscape permit and a naturalistic landscape permit, one being purely native plants, the other naturally occurring plants. We kind of combined that into just one permit, natural landscape permit. Again, that was required to exceed the height limit. We've changed the time frame to mitigate from 5 days to 48 days.
48 hours.
I'm sorry, 48 hours. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We've changed the height of the vegetation from 10 inches to 12 inches, and we continue to manage noxious weeds, although that list is ever expanding, and there are many new plants added to that list from even 10 years ago when I started here. So in 2017, we switched to the administrative fine process, and we basically followed the snow removal administrative fine process to do that for consistency. This was helped to cover staff costs. Prior to that, basically what we were doing is and this is a complaint-based system, so we only respond to complaints. But we would respond to a complaint, and if they were in violation of the ordinance, we would leave a door hanger saying you're out of compliance and you have 5 days to mitigate, or a contractor will show up. Well, really, all we were doing is managing private property for people, and we were getting nothing in return, and there were staff costs to do that. So we implemented the administrative fine. That's an escalating fine process with the hope of reducing the number of violations. $60, $90, and $120 are the fine amounts. 60 first time, this is within a rolling calendar year, 90 for the second offense, and 120 for the third, and any ongoing offenses within that rolling calendar year. There is an appeal process to the administrative fine, so people have 10 days with which to appeal if they feel it was an unfair violation. And since we implemented it, we've really had no more than a handful of appeal hearings. And we do feel that the administrative fine has drastically reduced the amount of repeat offenders, which I can show in an upcoming slide here. In 2020, we had some major changes implemented because of COVID. We implemented a no mow May, and that wasn't necessarily due to COVID. That was just an effort to recognize that pollinators are struggling and we can help them early in the season. Of course, this year, that all kind of got thrown out the window because it probably should have been no mow April. Anyway, we also stopped enforcement of the tall grass portion of our ordinance in order to help those who were struggling financially from the impacts of COVID. And we still continue to enforce the noxious weed law. And this is a slide I was talking about. You can kind of see over time how many inspections we've had to carry out, how many resulted in violations, and then how many had to be mitigated by contractor by year from 2013 through last year. I'll just let you read that and give you a minute. (2020) kind of sticks out because there was very few complaints. Those would have all been noxious weed complaints. And I can go back if anyone needs to, but in the interest of time. So the changes that we're proposing for this year, as of July of 23, the state of Minnesota adopted a new natural landscape statute, which allows natural landscapes on any private property within the state. And since we have been requiring a permit to do that, we would no longer require a permit. Now, the statute reads that they do need to be managed. So you can't just simply leave a lawn grow and say that you're converting it. So there is that aspect of it, which may lead to some challenges that we'll have to adapt to as we encounter those. Noxious weeds, of course, will still not be permitted, and it will only be turf grasses that are regulated by ordinance. Those would be bluegrass, ryegrass, fescues, and their blends. So those will still have to be kept at 12 inches of height or less. We would still require a permit to deviate from grass within the right of way. That's not private property, and so we would still keep control of what happens there. But we're always advocating for that, for residents to do that. And then the other change that we're proposing is adding some language about the property owner's responsibility to maintain the abutting boulevard. That there's been some confusion surrounding that. And so we just made that a little bit more clear in the version that we would bring forward for approval. And that is all I have. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted, you touched on it there at the end, but that idea of natural landscape, is that the same as letting go wild, or is there a definition of natural landscape?
So by the state statute, it would allow native and naturally occurring plants to exist on private property. So if, we have the numbers, have some numbers on how many vacant parcels get cited for tall grass and weeds. And generally, those will probably be exempt to our ordinance now, so long as they don't have noxious weeds. Again, you can't just let the turf grasses in your yard go and not mow them and say that you're converting it to natural. You would have to do something different. You would have to plant, develop, present a plan of how you're going to transition from turf grasses to natural landscaping.
So again, if someone just let something go wild, didn't do anything with it for 2 months, that would not be defined as a natural landscape.
Correct.
Okay. Then just so I understand, we have no mow May, we have signs up.
Yes.
Implies to me that we're not enforcing any sort of tall grass during the month of May.
Yes.
What happens on June 1st? Does it just goes right back to saying that now we do, or is it a certain time?
Nope. June 1st, we begin enforcement of the ordinance.
Okay.
And so we're already getting calls, and we're explaining that we're abiding by our no mow May policy, that they will have to call back on June 1, assuming that there's still an issue with whatever property that they have a complaint about.
Okay. And then just your experience with these natural landscapes, if they really are let go for the, or done this, somebody does some work on it, lets it be, do you ever get to the point that it's just not viable for individual to maintain it over time? It just gets up to the point that you need experts in to dig things out, or to, it just gets past the point of a lawnmower or what someone can do with hand tools?
I think there are certain species that can become overabundant, desirable species like goldenrod, which can over time take over a prairie area. But those would all be allowed. They're not on the noxious weed list. And so somebody could, in theory, have a yard of goldenrod and it would meet the intent of the state statute. Am I getting at your question?
No, well, I have this view of like things that we don't maintain for 2 years, and it takes a major contractor to come in and clear the hillside of buckthorn and things like that, that it's not something that somebody can go out, a resident can go out and just maintain that property.
Right. That could happen because our ordinance does not address woody plants. And so if somebody is no longer mowing a parcel, then there will be the opportunity for buckthorn to take control. So if they're unable to manage those noxious, and buckthorn is on the noxious weed list, but it is not practical to control it because it's so widespread. Our ordinance does not address any woody plants. So that by state statute would be allowed and there would be no issue with that.
Okay.
But it would be the property owner's responsibility to bring in a contractor. It's not up to the city to have to take.
I think so. Again, I'm just trying to picture the complaints that the city will get when that happens.
Right.
But I mean, and I'm trying to get comfortable with the idea that that's private property and we have no responsibility there. And I'm going back to the original reason why I have a tall grass is we do have neighborly things here and things like that to worry about. So I'm just trying to get it understood.
The only thing we could regulate moving forward on those parcels would be noxious weeds.
Yep. That's what's in the ordinance. Okay, thank you.
All right, Mayor Norton.
And I think Councilmember Keen was getting to, I think the gist of what I was thinking about. Every year, as you know, my office gets calls about a particular contractor who has lots of property. You're smiling because I know who you're talking about, who I'm talking about. And because it butts up their property and they're very unhappy. And now, as I understand it, the state law says as long as there's no noxious weeds in there, those calls are moot.
Correct.
Okay. So part of me wants to almost proactively let folks know. And maybe we can, get some PR going here because this has been an ongoing issue year after year. Because there are people that own property that aren't developing it, that just let it go. And now they're going to be legitimately able to do so.
Yes.
Yeah. And I also wondered, and there's no permit required.
Not on private property.
Okay. So I recall we had an intern last year that worked in the park department that came forward wanting contractors to be able to require a permit, but that will no longer, so that they could have non-noxious weed, tall grass, like a homeowner can. And now we're saying the state says that's not even necessary.
Yeah, what this statute does to our ordinance is we can no longer regulate that on private property,
Okay.
and we
So,
can't require a permit.
so I'm reiterating this only because these calls come in every year. There are going to be people upset by this change, and I want to just be clear here, this is not a change in the city. It's a state level change that the only thing we'll be able to do is if there are noxious weeds growing, those could still be reported, but not just tall grasses.
And require the mowing of grass. So the turf grasses,
Yes, if it's a lawn.
if it's a lawn, yep,
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Appreciate that.
yes.
We'll do Councilmember Bransford, then Kirkpatrick, then Dennis.
Well, Mayor Norton got me thinking a little bit about that particular situation. So if there is an empty lot that's just let go, what guarantee is it that it's not just really tall dandelions and weeds and a bunch of other stuff? So if someone complains, you just go, nope, it's an empty lot, new state statute, or do you have to go inspect to make sure it's not just a bunch of weeds? And
That will be the only particular challenge in my mind is when we send somebody out to say, oh, they've let their grass grow, and versus a vacant lot, which is naturally occurring plants. And so by definition, they would meet the intent of the new state statute.
right, but if it's naturally growing, right? So if I have a corner lot downtown that's just let go, right, and it's not naturally occurring plants, how are you gonna tell that it's just a bunch of weeds that aren't noxious, right? Or, I mean, is the intent to just let it go so that naturally occurring plants actually do grow there? And so, bottom line is the question is how do you differentiate between somebody being lame and just letting an empty property go and somebody who's actually really trying to foster natural plants from?
Yeah, it will be situational, but again, naturally occurring plants are allowed. So as long as they're not noxious weeds, then in theory, and we're gonna have to figure some of this out ourselves. A vacant lot let go is probably the one instance where we might have some confusion on how we would apply the ordinance. But naturally occurring plants, as long as they're not noxious and they haven't let turf grasses just grow rampantly, in theory, those would be not enforceable
So
by the statute.
I'm trying to get my head, so is it 50-50? I mean, how long does it take for natural plants to take root and grow? If it's just one season and it's just been a bunch of tall weeds, how are you gonna differentiate between?
Well, by definition, a weed is a plant that is not in the place it should be.
Well, I
but
don't
we-
necessarily, just,
We don't look at it as a weed. It's only if it is on the noxious weed list.
okay, so let me rephrase this. Do we have a precise list of things that this statute would cover that otherwise they have to go mow? And what percentage of those things do they have to have before it meets is it one plant? Is it 20? Is it
No,
half?
we do not have that list. We have a list of noxious weeds. That is the only thing that we can enforce now on private property. Anything else that's naturally occurring or native is allowed.
Like crabgrass.
Yeah, it's not a classified turf grass, which those turf grasses are identified in the ordinance. So crabgrass would not be something that we would regulate. It would not look nice.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
I really like this one, and therein lies the rub, naturally occurring. When I read through all of this, I just thought, oh my gosh, somehow naturally occurring has to get out of there. Because one of the most powerful living organisms on this planet is a seed. All it needs is warmth, light, and water to germinate. Naturally occurring plants can happen within 15 days of a seed drop, especially from certain plant families once they're dormant. I mean, if we didn't manage landscapes, there would be plants everywhere. It's kind of like the spider thing. If we didn't have spiders, we'd be overtaken by insects. Similar kind of concept. So I sort of have an issue with that term naturally occurring. I think it's going to confuse a lot of people, but I don't know what can be changed about that. I think it's really important that the noxious weed list is, and I haven't looked at it in a while. Pardon me, I kind of skimmed over this area just because I could. But that noxious weed list, if each particular plant on the list can have a link that would link to like the USDA noxious weed or DNR DNA with photographs, so people can be guided towards easy plant identification, because dandelions are not noxious weeds.
Correct.
Neither is crabgrass. We might not like how they look, but most people don't understand the biological place in an ecosystem of those plants, right? So it's totally different to be walking through some sort of unmanaged landscape, like on a trail at Quarry Hill. All those plants are naturally occurring, and that landscape where people just decide, for instance, no mow May, to not do anything. You're going to get a mess. So that's only my thing that I would like to see, is make sure that we've got a really tight parameter for easy identification. You go out with your 6-year-old, your 10-year-old to see, oh yeah, that is spotted knapweed, right? And you can understand what those true noxious weeds are. I think that would help the public. I think also further education would help people to understand that some of those things we just don't like, that we've been managing for decades with chemicals, aren't noxious weeds. They're just out of our repertoire of understanding what can occur because we've been so managing it in the past. And I just keep looking at you, but I don't mean to pick on you. Yeah.
All I'm seeing is 20-foot tall crabgrass and people bringing it in the air.
Board representative.
You know, I am too, and I totally get it. I have an unmanaged property next door to me by the company. And it's like, well, it's May now, so I guess I can't report them. I'll wait until June. But the point is, even going to the no mow May, North Dakota State just put out a lot of really sound data on maybe how impractical and how unreasonable and maybe how unfortunate no mow May is, because most of us who know, pollen from a dandelion is kind of like the junk food buffet for bees. It's not really a good source of proteins for bees. And then if you've got the houses down the road who don't like the dandelions, they're applying more chemicals to their lawn. And they're misapplying, or they're not reading the proper instructions for the amount of chemical to apply. What is that doing to our stormwater system where is the best thing? So I can appreciate how managing this and the policy around writing it is going to be difficult. So I appreciate this coming forward. Being a part of it from its inception with Bowser and discussing this has been fun. I really like this. I think it's great, going towards more naturalistic landscapes. The only other piece that I would like to see is commercial properties. They need a much higher rate, especially when they are managed by a company that the property owner is paying to manage and the properties are not being managed. Jack up the rate.
Of the fines?
Yeah, of the fines. I can see on-site property owners, who, even in like neighborhood situations, we all know maybe the elderly person who needed hip surgery or shoulder surgery, and we're going to help them maintain their lawn. But on some of these really larger commercial properties that are waiting to be developed, and they're off-site property owners and they're paying a management company, those people should be on it. They have contracts to do that stuff. So I would like to see the fines go up for those folks. And then the only other piece I had was, I believe it's on page 2 of the new ordinance. The computer shut off here. The pages aren't numbered themselves, but in the PDF when I'm on it, it's page 2. The next to the last line. I'm sorry, it's not the ordinance, Rachel. It is it's the memo, Tall Grass and Weed Study Session 5/13/24.
Okay.
The second page at the bottom. I don't know if the term ornamental grasses is supposed to be in there or not. That sentence reads a little weird to me. Grass and non-noxious weed vegetation on natural or altered slopes greater than 2 to 1 ornamental grasses.
They would be those are exemptions. So ornamental grasses would still be exempt because they're not a turf grass.
Right, okay. So it doesn't matter whether it's clump forming or rhizomatous or anything. It's just the definition of an ornamental grass versus the turf grasses that we typically use. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense then.
And
Thanks
that
for
is,
explaining that.
that is language from the existing ordinance. That
Okay.
hasn't changed.
All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
But you guys were going to have a really in-depth exchange here. No,
Well,
Councilmember,
there
or
is
do you want to
strong-
respond to any of her other comments about?
Yeah,
Language.
I will, to the pictures. We do provide links to the MDA's website, which does have a picture and explanation of each plant that's on the list. There's hot links for every one of them, and we do share that on our website. And to Mr. Bransford's point, there is strong language in the statute about these landscapes being planned. And so that may be where, although turf grasses are the only thing that have to be mowed, it's clearly states that the natural landscape should be planned, and maybe there is room for us to be able to address your concern in that, but they are very vague about that. And we always like to be as black and white as possible. So when we send our inspector out, they know exactly what we're asking them to look for.
So in terms of that, which got me thinking, do you go to owner say it's all crabgrass, which is fine, but do you have a plan? And-
Currently, we do not.
And what is the plan? I mean, do you have them fill out a form that says, I am planning to do this, here is what I'm going to have in
Yes.
5 years, or, right?
For the permit that we required on private property, we ask for what they're gonna plant. So a list of plants that would be planted in their natural landscape. How they're gonna transition, if they're going to kill the existing grass, how long they expect the transition to take, if there's gonna be any maintenance to it, in years 1, 2, or 3, in order to prevent noxious weeds. So that was all part of the permitting process.
Gotcha. Okay, so they can't just have a bunch of crabgrass and say, oh, well, yeah, we're thinking about it. So yeah, well, yeah, we're gonna just let it grow. They have to have a plan.
That's prior, so now you can not be
Prior, yes, that was the requirement
Oh, okay,
when we
now
required.
I've lost any leverage.
It's still
lost that
it's
leverage.
still required on city property, which would be the right of way of a boulevard. So the
Correct.
the natural landscape permit is still required for a boulevard if you were gonna do like a boulevard bioswale or anything like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yep.
Which thistle?
All right, we're gonna hand it, I know, this is deep into the weeds. All right, Councilmember Dennis, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So the complaint-driven situation, I think, has been a huge issue for a lot of people that have called me. I keep the noxious weed list on my phone. People call and I'm looking it up. I liked what you mentioned about the identification factor. I know there are apps out there. I've used them. I can't remember them. I'm not gonna use them same right now, but you can show the plant and it can identify. Has that ever been thought of to be used on the city site? So if someone goes to the city site, looking up the noxious weeds and say, oh, click to this app, they can just, because many people have it on their phone, can immediately say, oh, that is a thistle, or oh, that's Creeping Charlie. It's annoying, but not illegal. Are there that kind of a technology we could maybe do for the city? So really people can, right there on the spot, not have to guess.
I'm not gonna say that we are noxious weed free on public lands, but we try to control them anywhere they exist. So if I understood right, you were wondering if we could have a demonstration.
Yeah, or like a
Garden
link to
or-
certain acceptable apps. I'm not a techie person, but someone can immediately look at the list of noxious weeds and have a little click that they can click, turns into their camera phone. They can, I don't know. Those are food for thought, I think would be kind of a
Yeah,
neat
we don't
idea to
have something
so.
like that currently. We just provide the noxious weed list, which does have that
Pictures.
information, but we don't have any example sites.
It's a very long list, so sometimes when we were looking and trying to figure out what
Oh,
these
yeah.
are, so, okay, well, thanks. My thought about the complaint driven, and I unfortunately, but I think fortunately, have had a complaint. Someone complained about my toys in my kids' the backyard not being organized. Someone came in, I rearranged the toys, everything was fine. There was no no issues with fines or things like that. But when people were in the backyard, city people were in the backyard looking, they could see things that could, I won't go into, but like, oh, that wheelbarrow's full of water. That could be harboring mosquitoes, but it feels like the city employees' hands were even tied because are complaint driven have to be from a resident, or can you, one of the staff, drive down the street and say, oh, I see, can city employees do a complaint? And then on top of that, are there any obligation of companies? Because I know arborists are always in people's, an arborist, which is my yard, helping with a tree this past week. And they're like, oh, look at your neighbor's tree. That's an ash, and I'm like, oh, so people who have expert experience in hazards, who are in people's yards for many, many reasons, could be a handy person, a repair person, someone who sees a complaint. Is there any obligation for anyone who sees something that could be a safety issue complaint, reporting it?
So we follow up on any complaint regardless of who it's from, but we do not accept complaints from anyone within our department. So it could come from another city department. It could come from a contractor. So generally, we don't know who's making the complaint, or many times we don't. But we do not create violations within our department, if that makes sense.
Okay. So if you're like what happened with my situation, people were in the yard, they could see things, but because I did not make a complaint, I just talked to my neighbor, said, your wheelbarrow has water in it. And, so there was no complaint ever filed. But I guess my worrisome is like liability issues if I'm jumping into maybe trees, but obnoxious weeds. I mean, there are some that are poisonous. They're real, I think, hazard for kids and pets. Is there any kind of liability, something that's mandated from the city that I'm just thinking that.
That they have to
They have to
control
report,
poisonous plants or report them?
I don't know. I feel that there's a lot of people who are like, well, that's not my yard. I'm not going to mess with it. But it could potentially be a life and death issue if it's a certain weed or certain, issue with a tree. I just was wondering if that's any kind of city thing that would be advised of all companies to report.
Madam President, I can maybe take that one.
That'd be great.
We're not a mandated reporter for weeds. We don't require that. No city officials or residents are mandated reporters relative to weeds and grass.
Thanks for that clarification.
Okay. And then thank you. A couple other quick questions. So I know this from lived experience. I have a creeping Charlie in my yard, pretty natural. My kids love the smell. We lay in the grass. We don't have to worry. We never use chemicals. And we love it, but there's pockets of grass that's gets really tall. So when you have the normal May, my backyard is pretty low all May, and then all of a sudden there's a big pocket of grass. So we have to go and, so is that to be truly a natural landscape, people are needing to transition, having to actually dig up their lush pockets of grass. I feel it's kind of hard because if you do have a natural, then you have little areas like my yard, it's an odd mowing thing to keep little areas down and grab that.
If there are those stated turf grasses, you'd be expected to mow them. Now, there is a provision in the ordinance that it has to be 144 square feet in total before it is a violation. And so we do that. We'll estimate based on pockets of tall vegetation and make sure that it matches that 144 square feet.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, that's good to know. And then the last question is chemical regulation. I know that maybe 10 years ago, there was a company in town that sprayed on a windy day. And our windows were open and we just got this me and my small children had woofs of chemicals in our living room. And it was just very, upsetting because, we're breathing in this and of course gets all over the furniture and everything. And I did research, found out they should not have been spraying with that wind amount that day. For residents, I know, so companies have regulations because I've looked it up, but for residents, is there any regulations on chemicals? Because chemicals can be highly dangerous. And if people are doing their own chemicals,
It sounds like we have a pretty straightforward question that can be answered. That'd be great.
okay, I'm
Yeah,
just
so
describing for clarity.
over-the-counter chemicals can be applied by the label. The Department of Ag will respond to any pesticide complaints. So, yeah, you could potentially report that to the Department of Agriculture and they may follow up. Now, if it's a homeowner and they're using over-the-counter chemicals, I don't know that the department, what they would do about that. Certainly if it's a company, they have to keep very detailed records that they would have to produce for the Department of Ag should a complaint come in, and then those get followed up on.
It wouldn't be the city, it would be the department, it would be,
The city does not regulate chemical applications.
okay, thank you. And I appreciate that. I'm, again, for the city attorney, I apologize if I was a little narrative. I don't
no trouble.
appreciate being
No trouble. We can move
Thank you.
on.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
any other final discussion? Otherwise, sounds good. Thanks for your work on this, and
Thank you all.
we will do a quick study session schedule update before I'll turn it over to our attorney to break us into closed session.
Thank you, Council President, Council Members, Mayor Norton. Your next study session is on June 10th. So we will have a legislative session recap. We're also planning to have a downtown task force update with our partners. And then a review of the construction manager at risk contract process for the water reclamation plant and all of the work that's happening out there. So just a reminder, we have only the one study session in May. This one.
Excellent. All right, Mr. Spindler-Craig, we have an executive set or closed session. Go ahead and fill us in.
We do indeed. Thank you, Madam President. Consistent with the posted agenda, this is the type of closed session that we need a motion and a vote on it. No, we don't usually do that in a study session, but we need to move into this closed session. This is a closed session that would be held to discuss strategies for labor negotiations pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.03, Subdivision 3 in City Hall, Room 104 at a time you choose.
Great, is there a motion?
To go into session. We don't have to adjourn, do we? Or do we have to?
To adjourn to closed session
Sorry.
for.
Yep.
All
Nothing
right,
to add. I'm sorry, not one thing to add, say it's 6:05, meet at 6:05 in room 104.
yes, let's meet at 6:05. So motion, the attorney's advice, second, okay, there's no discussion on a motion to adjourn anyway. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. All right, so we'll see you in 10 minutes in 104.
Recording stopped.
Council members who have been interrupted by staff when they are asking a question, I will go back and look, but I've been